What is up, folks? Right now I am at a hotel making my way back across the United States, headed back to my home of Los Angeles because for the last 22 days I've been working as a B-cam operator for a new documentary, and this bad boy right here was the camera I was shooting on. This is the Canon C500 Mark II with a Canon Cine servo lens 18 to 80mm t4.4. And as you can see, I've also been using my 5-inch Blackmagic 12G HDR video assist along with this setup. And since I was in a real-world working situation with this camera for over 3 weeks, I just wanted to share my experiences working with this setup. But there is one disclaimer. This particular documentary that I was working as the B-cam operator on, it was being sponsored by Canon. So I have to tell all of you right now, the opinions expressed in this video that you're about to watch are solely my own and in no way reflect the opinions of the producers or the director of the project I was hired to shoot for. That being said, let's begin. First off, the full frame sensor is really nice. I love the dynamic range and it handles the highlights and skin tones so damn well. One quick note I want to mention right now is as you're watching these BTS videos, please keep in mind that what you're seeing is not really giving any justice to the image. I've recorded these BTS videos with my iPhone 11, and so the skin tones will look heavily saturated, and that's just a result of what the iPhone is doing in the auto video mode when recording the screen of either the video assist or the Canon C500 Mark II. So just keep that all in mind that you're looking at a screen recording a screen. However, if you do want to check out the actual raw images, some color-graded screen grabs from the actual shoot, then I highly recommend you check out the Dog Times Patreon. That is where I break down every single project I ever get hired to shoot on. So I'll leave a link down in the description below for any of you interested in wanting to check that out. So this camera right here, the C500 Mark II, has a few different options for shooting. You can do 6K 10-bit RAW, utilizing the full frame sensor. However, when using this particular Cine servo lens, the 18 to 80, this is a Super 35 lens, so you do get some pretty heavy vignetting when shooting in full frame. However, there is another Cine servo lens that will work with full frame because it's actually a full frame lens, and that is the Canon Cine servo lens, the 17 to 120, I believe. It's a little faster as well. But on this particular shoot, we also had a 70 to 200mm Cine servo zoom lens. It's also an f4.4, but because of its long focal length, you can actually use it with the full frame 6K RAW because the lens is so long, you can actually bypass the vignetting. The one downside of this camera is that the 6K resolution is only available when shooting in full frame RAW. But however, Canon does offer you the option to record in Super 35 mode, which is a 4K 10-bit RAW, or you can do a 4K 10-bit 422XF AVC Canon codec. But keep in mind that the 4K is a 4K DCI resolution, so it is true 4K. Another option in the camera is to shoot in Super 16 mode, which is a 2K resolution, and there you have the option to shoot in either 2K 10-bit RAW or the 10-bit XF AVC codec. And of course, you also have the options to shoot in Ultra HD or 1080p as well. For our workflow on this particular doc, we only shot in RAW when we had a lot of uncontrollable highlights in the scene or when we just wanted to preserve as much detail as we could in the sky. Otherwise, we mainly lived in the 4K 422 10-bit XF AVC codec, primarily just to save on space. We were shooting on 2 of these C500 Mark IIs, and we were shooting anywhere from 1 to 6 terabytes a day. So the media that we used was these SanDisk Extreme Pro CF Express cards. And I'm gonna pop one out right here for you. These are awesome little cards. These are 512 gigabytes a piece, 1400 megabytes per second write speed, so they're pretty dang fast. And when shooting in 4K 10-bit, you get about 166 minutes off of one of these cards and about 60 minutes per card when shooting in 4K RAW. The biggest thing I love about this camera is the sensor itself. I love the color rendering. I love the way it handles the highlights. It has amazing dynamic range even when you're not shooting in RAW, and I'm really loving the internal NDs. So you get a 2, 4, and 6 stop ND, but then you can also go into the menus and extend the ND filtration so you get an extra 2 stops, an 8 and 10 stop as well. But very rarely did we ever find ourselves going beyond the 6 stops of ND, but it is nice to know that you have those extra stops in case you ever need them. You do have the option to record to an internal SD card you can do 2K proxies to that card when shooting in 6K RAW. However, only after our shoot was done did we realize that Canon finally updated the firmware, because before, on the old firmware that we were shooting on, you could only record proxies if you were shooting in 6K RAW. But now apparently, just recently, Canon have updated the firmware on these C500 Mark IIs, so now all the different resolutions can record proxies to the internal SD card as well. I didn't mind too much because with my Blackmagic HDR Video Assist, I was just recording my own proxies anyway. Another cool feature of the camera that we used all the time is the SNF mode, otherwise known as slow and fast mode, but we all know it as just a variable frame rate mode, right? So when we tap this button right here, you can instantly go into overcrank mode, and when shooting in 4K, you can do overcrank up to 60 frames per second. Something else I found very handy on this shoot was the focus tools when shooting in manual mode. So there's these little triangles on the LCD screen that line up and make an hourglass when your subject is in focus. And that comes in very, very handy when you're running on the gun and on the fly, and you just need to tap anywhere on the LCD screen that you want to get critical focus on and line those triangles up, and you're good to go. I just found that really useful and advantageous when needing to get sharp focus on the fly. Another cool thing about this camera that I really enjoyed is all of the internal LUTs that it offers. And something else cool is that Canon has a whole slew of free LUTs available on their website, so I was able to get the same LUT that I was monitoring with in the camera onto my Blackmagic 12G HDR Video Assist. We were shooting in Cinema Gamut Canon Log 2, and I was just using the LUT that converts the Cinema Gamut Canon Log 2 to a BT709 wide dynamic range. So that was the LUT I used. However, to make sure that the image on the HDR Video Assist was matching the way the LUT looked on the C500's LCD screen, what I ended up doing is adjusting on the HDR Video Assist. I changed the contrast to 45% and then set the saturation to 60, and then the LUTs were matching up quite nicely from each screen. Also, having this third SDI port for time code is pretty awesome. We were instantly able to jam time code in a matter of a couple seconds, so that's really good for documentary shooting as well. Not to mention you have 4 XLR ports, and you're able to monitor each of the audio levels and mix them down, mix them any way you want. So now I'm going to share with you the things that I didn't really care for about this camera. The first one being the low light capabilities. Pretty much anything beyond 1600 ISO gets very, very noisy very quickly. Also, I am personally not a fan of all of these buttons on the side. I know a lot of you guys are into this, but for me, I just found them getting in my way all the time. I only ever used 3 of the buttons: the ND, the white balance, and the slow and fast mode for those variable frame rates. Anything else was just in my way. I constantly found myself hitting other buttons, turning on the focus peaking and all of this, when all I was reaching for was the ND. And I know you can program these to be whatever you want, but at the end of the day, I just found them a bit of a nuisance. Also, I do find it weird that Canon gives you all of these buttons, but yet you can't make one of them give you a clean feed to the LCD screen. So if you don't have an external monitor of your own, good luck getting a clean feed on this tiny screen, because it tends to keep all of this info, status, text on here, and there's a lot of gack on here. It's hard just to get a clean look of your image if you don't have your own external monitor. Something else I found a little weird is that the only way I could get my external monitor to display the variable frame rates was if I was using the monitor port only. So on this C500 Mark II, you have 3 ports for external monitoring. You have a monitor port, which is SDI, then you have HDMI, and then you have another SDI port. However, the only one that will actually work with the variable frame rates, meaning the only one that will show the image when using variable frame rates or the SNF mode, is the monitor port. So HDMI is not going to work for you, and neither is that second SDI port. Something else I found a little interesting about this particular camera is when I'm shooting in the variable frame rate mode, the record command doesn't work. Meaning if I'm just in a normal 2398 frame rate, I can hit record on the camera and the HDR Video Assist will automatically start recording. However, as soon as I go into SNF mode or the variable frame rate mode, for instance, for example, if I want to go to 36/2398 or even 48/2398 or whatever the case may be, if I hit record on the camera, the Video Assist will not record, so then I'll have to hit record a second time. So it's just weird little things like that that I'm just not used to. Something else really interesting is when shooting in 60 frames per second, a true 60p, we're not talking about overcrank, so I'm not talking about the SNF mode of 60 over 2398. I'm talking about literally going into the camera and changing the frame rates from 2398 to a true 60p signal. Whenever I would do that, the Blackmagic HDR Video Assist would drop frames like crazy, pretty much be unusable clips being recorded to my HDR Video Assist. Keep in mind, I'm using a 12G SDI cable. The monitor is a 12G monitor. It also has the ability to record 4K 60p HQ ProRes files. The really interesting thing about all of this is that the camera is only sending out a 1080p 60 frames per second signal. And whenever the camera is in a true 60p, even though it's sending out that 1080p 60p, to the monitor, it's still dropping frames. I just found that really strange because if I wanted to shoot in overcrank, meaning if I set the camera back to a normal 2398 frequency signal and then hit the SNF mode, go into overcrank of then do 60 over 2398, then there's no problems. There's no drop frames on the HDR Video Assist. So I just found that really interesting. Something weird is happening with the frequencies of the camera and what it's being sent out via SDI to the monitor. Maybe there's some kind of incompatibility between the HDR Video Assist and the C500 Mark II, or maybe there's just some kind of another little firmware glitch going on with the camera itself. The only other thing that I think would be noteworthy to mention is the battery life. These cameras chew through batteries like crazy. We were using these little Dracast V-mounts. These are 14.8 volt, 90 watt hour V-mount batteries, and they only last an hour. But other than that, it was a very interesting shoot. I do love the sensor on this camera. I love the way it handles the highlights and skin tones. I love the color rendering. It has amazing dynamic range. Even when not shooting in RAW, I was really impressed with the dynamic range of this sensor. But at the end of the day, I'm just not a fan of the camera body itself. I'm not a fan of these ENG style cameras. Also with the low light capabilities, or I should say low light incompatibility, and just it's a big, beefy, heavy camera. At the end of the day, I'm not 100% convinced that this is actually the best camera for documentaries. However, I do want to point out that these Cine Servo zoom lenses, even though these are slow, only a t4.4, they are really nice lenses. I love the way they separate the foreground from the background. They actually do have a little bit of that Zeiss 3D pop to the image. They give a really nice painterly look. But yeah, at the end of the day, I guess I would say, me personally, I would not invest in this camera with my own money. It does cost around 16 grand, I believe. But however, if you asked me, hey Justin, would you trade your Pocket 4K for the C500 Mark II? Yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. The best things about this is that full frame 6K RAW that you can get. Not to mention the internal NDs. I'm gonna miss those so much. And the one thing that I haven't mentioned yet is the image stabilization that this camera provides, and it's actually really damn good. However, at the end of the day, it really comes down to, I guess, the form factor and the weight is the things that I'm just not really a fan of on this camera, and of course, no real low light capabilities. So yeah, that's gonna do it. Maybe you guys noticed I changed my Instagram handle to Kid Tech. That was my first real set nickname that was given to me on this documentary, and I gotta be honest with you guys, I kinda dig it.
Hey, if you're a fan of the channel and like to support, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first and easiest way is to just hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit the bell so you get the latest videos as soon as they're dropped. But if you want to go above and beyond that and be a part of a daily filmmaking conversation, then I invite you to join the Dog Times community over on Patreon. That is where once a week I release an exclusive members-only video breaking down projects, talking gear, and sharing real-world experiences as a DIY indie filmmaker in Los Angeles. But my favorite part about the Patreon is the conversations happening over on Discord. That is where you will be connected with like-minded filmmakers and have instant access to learning ways to improve your own skills so you feel more confident about working on set as a professional. So welcome to the Dog Times community, and I'll chat with you soon.